Well, hello everyone. It's Pastor Landon here. We have a special guest with us, and before I get into introducing our special guest, which you already probably know, I wanted to reintroduce this series we've been doing throughout COVID. We took a little bit of a hiatus here as far as collecting these testimonies, but this particular series is called This Is My Story. This series is it's conversations with people in which they are just sharing their story about how they came to know God and how Christ has intersected in their lives. And today, I want to introduce Matt Rose. Matt is one of our musicians here at Fishers Point Community Church, and we're so thankful to have you sharing with us. So thank you for being here today. At the point of us recording this, it is actually the week of Veterans Day, and we actually didn't plan it specifically because of this, but Matt happens to be a veteran, and thank you for your service, Matt. I know you hear that a lot, but we're really thankful that we actually have the ability to come here to church and to worship freely, and you're a part of that story as well. So today I want to talk with Matt about his story, about how God has intersected in his life. So I'm going to be asking him questions. He's going to be talking with us, and we're going to get to know him more through that. So once again, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your life, Matt. Let's start with your childhood. I know that you're an only child, first and foremost. Yeah. And tell me a little bit about your household growing up. What did that look like, and how did that flow? Tell me about your family dynamics.
Family dynamic, let's see, I wasn't really raised in the church, so to speak. I knew that church was a thing, but when I was a child, my parents never really took me to church, which I found odd because it wasn't until later on in my life that I figured out that my dad was actually a musician in the Gospel Airs. So he played for years and years with the church and was quite the member with the church. And yeah, for whatever reason, throughout my childhood, maybe there was something there that happened that I was never really a part of that. But oddly enough, I guess going back to my childhood, the story to tie into everything is that I really should have never been born. So my mom had a lot of issues, and the doctor told her that there was like a 90%, 95% chance that I wasn't going to make it. And procedure after procedure, sure enough, here I am. Nothing, I didn't need a single thing afterwards. It was kind of a miracle all in itself. So yeah, I really should have never been here. So taking it all the way back to birth, yeah, God's always kind of had a hand on me. And as a kid, while I never went to church, I still felt the presence, if that makes sense. I never really seeked it. I never really did much. It was just there. I just naturally felt a presence there. So, yeah, it wasn't until later on in my life that I was kind of, not necessarily forced, but encouraged more to attend church.
So you kind of felt when you were really young that there was that openness there, and there was those questions that you really wanted answers to. And you kind of felt the presence, but you didn't know what it was exactly. It's hard for a child really to analyze that and to interpret that if they don't have any sort of guidance in that area. Yeah. So, and you didn't really have any guidance. But you said your father was a musician, and maybe that even planted a seed for you. You might not even know it.
It did. So transparently speaking, my mother and my father never had many decent conversations together. We'll see that those conversations tended up being more argument related. And being the only one in the house, I really did not want to hear that. So I took myself to my room with a guitar. And I would sit there and just try to make sense of it. And then time after time, I would just sit there and just sit with it. And I think God gave me that out, if you will, if that's an out. He gave me that tool to use and to build on over time to eventually use. So
So for you, learning the guitar at a very young age, when did you start playing guitar?
8.
8 years old, wow.
8.
8 years old for you was an escape. It was retreating within your own mind and your heart, and almost as a way to kind of reflect on some thoughts, you know, and it was an outward expression like that. Very interesting, very interesting. So you're 8 years old, you're retreating to your room, playing guitar, and you're learning and you're getting better at it. And you realize that it's something you really enjoy. Because for you, it was therapy, right?
It was.
So tell me a little bit more. We'll go back more to your younger age, but tell me more about your music history. You began to play a lot in different venues.
Yeah, it's funny. I started out with country and bluegrass, and somewhere along the line, I went into a genre of music that I don't think I really ever should have been involved with. And that's where the difficult nature of me playing came into play, because naturally it's like I wasn't intended to be playing that type of music. But once I started dialing it back and just going back to the roots of music, it wasn't until then that I actually started making sense of it. So again, I felt like I was being guided in a certain direction there. Music's always been an escape. I tried not to treat it like an escape, but it was a great tool to help me. And then today, knowing God, I didn't know Him back then the way that I do now. Now it's to have the two together. That's really been the only way I can worship is with that. And yeah, it's been awesome.
So going back to your childhood, 8 years old, you're learning the guitar and you're getting better and better and better. Then you start, fast forward, you get into the adolescence, and, all kinds of things are happening in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies, and things like that. We all know about that when it comes to adolescence, and we start making decisions out of our own volition. And we start, having our own thoughts. And it's not necessarily thoughts that our parents are giving us. So tell me a little bit about being a teenager, what that was like for you.
When I was a teenager, that was probably the farthest I've been away from God. When I was a teenager, just given that that's where I had probably the most of my freedom at the time. My parents had separated. I was staying with my dad. My dad was the type of person that's like, as long as you call me and let me know where you're at, I'm good.
Hands off.
Right. So if you take that and then you take, me, and it's like, oh, okay. We'll just say choices are made, right, wrong, or indifferent choices are made. And that was a little bit of a desert area, and I'll talk about the desert again as we talk, but that was probably the first part of my desert experience of going out and just not knowing anything and all the wrong things. It was an experience that it's helped me become who I am today, and I can't take any of it back. But throughout my teenage years, those were some, I'm sure for most teenagers, just a very confusing time of what's appropriate and what does right look like.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that.
But in the midst of your teenage years, someone was brought to you. God brought you somebody. Can you talk about that somebody?
Yes, you did. And so that was, junior year of high school. It was before then. We never started dating until junior year of high school. Yeah, God brought me Brian. I was very anti-religion at the time. I was so far away from it and so far out of it that I was just, none of it made sense to me. It's very Greek. It's like I understood that people believed it, but just for me to go and sit and listen, and because I was so far out of it that it just pulled me out of Christianity altogether, until she said, no, let's try going to church. Okay, we'll give it a shot. And then First Church of the Nazarene, right? I spent a lot of time with Pastor Mark and listening into his sermons, and I started to get closer. I wasn't close, but I started to get closer. And it's all about the church. It's all about the church, right? And it wasn't until I know I'm skipping because you
No, that's fine.
adolescence.
No.
But church after church after church after church, you can sit there and listen to sermon after sermon. But if it's not, I don't know. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until honestly I came to Fisher's Point that I had that feeling that this is what right looks like.
Yeah.
So again, I know I skipped a little bit.
Oh, no,
but
that's fine.
It kind
That's
of
fine.
plays into that a little bit.
Yeah, so you were talking a minute ago about that journey, and I'm picturing when you said the word desert, I'm picturing the Old Testament Israelites in the desert trying to find their way, and they might mess up, or they might, take a figure eight U-turn or something like that, but God is always providing for them along the way.
You're
So-
giving quail and you're asking for Mountain
Yeah.
Dew.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
so,
So tell me about what your interpretation of that whole desert experience in relation to your story.
So, in relation to my story, it wasn't until I entered the military that it was truly the desert in multiple aspects. One, I was in Kuwait, so it was truly a desert. And in that sense, I just had myself and God. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, you're either going to do this and it takes a little bit of effort, or you're not going to do it. And I noticed that when I actually sat with my meal and I prayed before my meal, every meal, and then I actually went to church and sat in sermons, that there was something inside me that actually started to change. And when I wasn't doing that or involved with God or any of that, that I was a very, very bitter, aggravated person. So my desert experiences, and I have another one a little bit later than that, that's where I've become the closest to God. So if I had anything to share as part of the story, is that you don't, from my experiences, you don't get close to God until you're in that desert. You gotta go through the hard times to understand what you've missed and what you need. And that was it for me in the military. I was, when you're hopping on a Skype call and you get a 3-second blip of somebody's face, and then that's it because the call dropped, and that's the only time you had. Those are times where you're just, they're brutal. So I reached out to God, and He definitely reached back. So.
Well, that's a wonderful phrase. I reached out to God and He definitely reached back. That's phenomenal. And I think so many times as Christians, we get into this habit of thinking that God can only work in us when everything's perfect, when we're in a good mood, when we're happy, quote unquote, whatever that means, Because happiness can be so temporary in the moment. It can be so fleeting and it can waver so much, But you're talking about this desert experience in which you were just alone and flat on your back, essentially. And maybe even sometimes you were literally flat on your back, But being able to connect with God in that way, that's powerful. And you were talking about another desert experience, but I'll let you go ahead and share that, because I think I know what you might talk about, but I definitely, I think people need to hear about our desert experiences and how God has worked through us.
Yeah. So part of my military journey, starting off in Korea probably wasn't the best thing for me or anyone. That should never be anybody's first duty station. However, that happens. With that said, alcohol was pretty much the cash crop there. That was the recreational activity. And so that was generally the go-to time after time. And there were 2 times I can remember that I shouldn't have woken up in my bed. I shouldn't have been there. And one was in the military and one was outside of the military. Well, no, they were both in the military, but different duty stations. And One was so bad where I was blacked out, and I was in a train station in a place where I've never been, and nobody could understand me. And I prayed and prayed, angrily prayed, on the walk out of there because I had no idea what to do. And I just prayed. I threw my hands up. I was like, I've got nothing else. I don't know what else to do. It's 100% my fault. This is my fault, and I'll take it. Buzz, I need some help. Taxi.
Oh, wow.
Taxi rolls up. All I had to say was K6. He took me right to Pyeongtaek, dropped me off.
Oh, man.
And there was nothing around. There was nothing around. There's a train station and nothing. And then, yeah. Another time, it was the same instance. Another spout with alcohol. And another instance where I shouldn't have woken up in my own bed. And I ended up, my car was demolished. It was trashed. My first sergeant needed to see me the next day. I had no idea what happened, but yet I woke up in my bed. I was there. I was guided. And it was another instance where, like, well, something happened to my vehicle. So how did I make it all the way home with nothing? And it's just another one of those instances where, at the end of it all, when I go to pick up the vehicle, the Bible's flipped open in the glove box.
Oh, my.
Yeah, those type of things you can't ignore. They're purposefully put there so you can kind of be like, hey, idiot, you get it? Come on. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in those desert times where you sit there and when you think everything is going great, those aren't the times where you get really close, I feel. It's in those desert times where I was on my knees just like, I don't know what to do. I can't do it, and I need help. And I've never been the type to ask for help, but generally when I have asked for help, he's always been there. So, especially in those times.
And it's hard to discount, like, you know, you might not be a seminary professor or a pastor that has your PhD in divinity or something like that. But it's hard to discount those times where you pray and something happens. Like something that shouldn't happen by any normal means of happening, but it happens anyway. And I think we all see that from time to time, and sometimes we just kind of put it to the side and say, well, that must have been a coincidence. But what you're saying is there wasn't even any room for a coincidence there. You know, there wasn't space for that. So, an amazing story of how God guided you. And I connect that to doctors saying 95% chance of him not being born. You know. And there's something about God putting his hand upon you that makes you think, oh, he must want me here for a reason. You know.
Yeah.
So going through the military, you know, obviously gave you experiences, gave you leadership skills, gave you, you know, obviously you had time to work on the guitar even more and even play in different venues there, among friends and all that. And then you get out of the military, and you get married, right? And tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did your life change after you were married?
It didn't change much right after Brianne and I became married because I immediately went back to Korea. So that was a tough time where, you know, we were married, we were together for a few days, and then right back to Korea for a year.
So you're still in the military?
Still in the military.
Okay.
But in those times, it's towards the tail end of my military career that I was closer to God than what I had been previously. And a lot of that is because of Brianne, and more importantly, I guess it's pulling it back even more is Keith and Debbie, and how they
Your
raised
in-laws,
their
by the way,
kids.
right?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
How Brittany, Brooke, and Brianne were all raised speaks volumes to the character of Keith and Debbie, because there's no room for error there. And from what I've learned from Brianne, helps me understand what I truly need to do and the type of person I need to be, the godly person I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's that integrity check, because, I mean, I look at her and it's there's no denying it. And when you look at me, I might be a case, but it's helped me keep myself in check time and time again. So,
Now, and I know this is not the Brienne session here, but I will say this, that she's a very meek person. She's very mild-mannered, and if you were to go up to her and say, hey, I want you to go preach to this group over here, she would go hide under a bed or in a closet or something.
Oh, yeah.
She's not into the outward expression like that, although through music she is and things like that. But being able to guide you closer to Jesus and seeing your ministry in the church, there's different way. I guess I'm trying to make the point of that there's different ways to be impactful to the masses. You know, you think about the person who led, Billy Graham to Christ, or, think about another pastor or something that is one-on-one and then affecting everybody. So you're married, you're what I would probably say inching closer to God, and you were talking about your church experiences growing up, and you felt that presence, and you're trying to interpret that. So within the last several years, there has been some major changes in your life. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Some loss, some definite different direction. I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, within the last 5-6 years, it seems like it's been nothing but a constant state of change, where I thought something was the way that it should have been or should be, and it is no longer that way. And that all started with my father when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. So when my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, that was a relatively brutal time, because he didn't have much of a relationship with either of his kids. So I have a half brother and a half sister. And given what happened in the past, they didn't even show up at the door. So that was it was a week and a half of basically me being hospice, just watching cancer, do what cancer does. And that was its own little trial through the desert. I was bitter during those times. I was very bitter during those times. And then lo and behold, 2 years later after that, my mom passed from a multitude of things. So that really kind of just made me a very bitter person, and I probably never really felt more alone in my life than that, which speaks to my relationship with God, because when you're alone, you're never really truly alone. And that was the meaning of it, is that you might feel alone, but you're never alone. So after I got over my anger, it took some time. But it helped, because while I love my parents dearly, there were some things that they did that it probably wasn't appropriate in the grand scheme of things. And I wasn't meant to do those things. That wasn't a purpose for me. The purpose was something else. So it took a long time. I'm still trying to digest some of it. I don't fully understand all of it, but I think I understand what I'm supposed to understand from it.
So that was another desert experience.
Absolutely.
Flat on your back experience.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how God has worked in your life, from someone who shouldn't have been born, from someone who should have died in Korea, and not because of bullets flying, but because of your own decisions. time and time again where God put you flat on your back so that you could listen to His voice. And we were talking before the camera came on about the fact that you're an analytical person. How does that come into play when you're trying to interpret what God is doing in your life?
It kind of works against you.
Yeah.
When you're an analyst, you tend to spend too much time in the weeds. And when you're spending so much time in the weeds, you're missing the point of what's trying to be explained to you or shown to you. Okay, well, how many steps did he take? All right. Did he actually, it's all these questions, and then you start to try to piece it all together and make sense of it yourself, and you just need to understand that it happened, I think. It's, as much as you want to sit here and try to slice it and dice it and try to make yourself feel comfortable, try to fit it into your own little, that's a lot of it. I feel like we try to take it and dissect it to make what we're doing feel or seem right when that's not it, and you take the situation for the situation.
That's a good way to put it. Well, I got to say again, it's amazing to see how God has worked through you and has guided you and has taught you and all of that. And I just thank you for sharing your story today, first and foremost. And then finally, is there any little nuggets that you've been thinking of and that you want to share with anyone who's watching this? Any takeaways, I guess you might say.
Yeah, I've got one. So I've always considered myself kind of a rock. I've always tried to be a rock. And I'm sure there are folks in the congregation that have that same mentality, and they just want to be a rock and be supportive. Well, even a rock with enough force can be pushed over. And sometimes it's not up to you to support. Sometimes you have to do this. And I will say that ever since I started not giving up, but stopped worrying, that was my biggest problem, is because I want to be a rock, I want to be supportive, but yet you got all this stuff. You just got to throw it up and just know that you can't do it. You can't do it all. So for those that are struggling with trying to do it all, stop, because you can't. And sometimes you need help outside of the people that are around you.
Wow.
So,
That's powerful. Powerful. Sometimes we want to be in control.
yeah,
Actually, we always want to be in control.
absolutely.
So, thank you again for being with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and end our time with prayer.
Absolutely.
Father, we thank you for Matt. We thank you for his family. We thank you for Brienne and Brody and Dax. We are just so grateful that you have brought the Rose family to us. And we're so thankful of their ministry and how you've guided Matt and how you've taught him. And in the times where he might not have been thankful for how you taught him, Lord, you have grown him so deeply. Help him to continue to rely on you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for watching today. If you have a story that you would like to share, please contact Pastor Landon at pastorlandon@fisherspointcc.org.